this evening with you and discuss the political possibility of sound, a book I recently published with Bloomsbury. I want to start off, I will do a sort of what I call a curatorial performance, a performance talk, where I animate some of the research that happens to produce the book, but it also happens since the book, developing on from the book. Because for me, a book is very much an object that can be performed, that we perform when we read it, that we perform when we write it, and where we can all be part of what we do with it and how something comes together. So I felt I wanted to first create, maybe use 5-10 minutes to create a bit of context about the book before then doing the performance, and then having a conversation with also with you about some of the suggestions. The book is framed by two text scores. Text scores are, I'm assuming you know what text scores are, scores written for a fluxus sort of invention, if you will, to give an instruction to do something. But I think that instruction is very emancipatory. It's a very wonderful way to say, you can perform this. I might have written it, but you will perform it differently than I have written it. And so it's framed by these two text scores to make that invitation clear. So the last one is putting on lipstick. Get a lipstick, any color, stand in front of a mirror or another reflective surface. Start to paint your lips while singing your favorite pop song. And in a way, there's also an absurdity, an awkwardness to that suggestion, and an invitation to also think that there is maybe not that much purpose, or sort of functional, pragmatic purpose. So as for reading just a few snippets, I maybe want you to give you a flavor and an idea what the book tries to do. So the title is The Political Possibility of Sound, Fragments of Listening. And the introduction starts as a writing of fragments. In a lecture at the Pacific Northwestern College of Art on 2nd November 2016, Colleen Smith, an interdisciplinary artist from Chicago, and I quote, whose work reflects upon the everyday possibilities of the imagination, end of quote, discussed the process of materials of her practice not as installations, films or sculptures, but as an arrangement of curiosity and improvised constructions. Her work brings together different images, tools and objects to create, in her words, excavations and speculations that loosen our assumptions of what we know and encourage us to embrace the instability of knowledge rather than the certainty it broadly offers, end of quote. She calls the resulting things, her artworks, speculative artifacts and awkward objects, which include their own fragility and possibility for failure, and are not shaped through the necessity of their task and fitting into expectations of their outcome, but inspire re-engagement, or what I would call doubt, and the practical suspension of habits. And that, to me, Colleen Smith's lecture on her awkward objects and speculative artifacts, and how she wanted to bring in the doubt, and that art was not about. She also says that I do this stuff, her artwork, not because of what I know, but because I want to know something else. I want to know more. And I was very intrigued by that, and it was really for me the impulse of writing, the impulse of writing a book that brought this knowledge and this pushing on what is to know also in a political arena. And so I too wrote what I hope are, to a degree, awkward objects and speculative artifacts, because the book is written not as a book in a sort of horizontal line, but as 7 essays that to me have a sort of a more vertical digging into something in the particular. The two books that preceded it were very horizontal and sort of developed in that way. And while this is a very interesting narrative, when you write a narrative like that, you often have to rush. You get pushed along by the pull and the purpose of what you try to say in the long run. Whereas the leisure of essays, there's something really nice about going down. And also essays from the French word essayer, to try. You don't have to succeed. And that's what's so wonderful about it. There is no success that is demanded of an essay necessarily. And so I work through 7 essays that all try to deal with the political possibility of sound, how we can rethink reality through the possibility of the political being the idea of how we live together, how we have organized ourselves to live together, and how this living together is governed, by whom and how we live together, of course, we assume to be normal, the norm, and maybe the only possibility because it's our actuality, but how maybe we could also think it in other possibilities. And these are different essays on the political, on cosmopolitanism, also on identity and subjectivity, on new materialism and materialism, and one of which I will just read a little bit is on geography. And why geography, but also architecture, is so important to me is because it makes maps. It makes the plan by which we live, how we go to places, how we go from one place to another on a 2-dimensional surface with lines, like a Google map. I can know where I'm going even if I don't know the place. And a sonic geography, or geography of sound, demands another knowing and another engagement. And I think this engagement is what I hope a sonic sensibility to our geography can trigger. And so I start this chapter off with a poem from Steve Roggenbach. This poem was written by a sailor, and I'm on the ocean while writing this. And the reason I love this poem is because it's all wobbly. He's on the ocean while writing it. There is no certainty about how to write this geography when you're on a ship, when you're on the sea. A geography of sound has no maps, it produces no cartography. It is the geography of encounters, misses, happenstance and events, invisible trajectories and configurations between people and things, unfolding in the dimension of the actual, while formlessly forming the dimension of its possibility, and secretly performing the impossible territories of a poet on the nighttime sea. On the ocean in the dark, she hears the rhythms and textures that are the material and content of an invisible terrain that leaves no trace and holds no certainty beyond its experience on the body as a material among things. And I really like this uncertainty, that it is a geography of experience. So it's not a geography where I already know where I'm going, but where every time I'm going, even to the same place, it will be a different journey, and I'll be at sea with what I thought I knew in order to know more. And just very briefly maybe, before starting the performance proper, I want to say a little bit why it is written in fragments, because in many ways, when I do a performance, I also perform the fragments of my own research. When I research, I sit in front of a bookshelf and my CDs and my records, and I pull them out and I listen, and I read bits and I read other bits, and I sit down again and I do nothing, and then I write a bit. So it is itself a performance, and it is from fragments rather than from a whole, or from the idea that we're creating a whole, I think that the writing on sound can happen. This book of essays is written in fragments that can be read out of order for a contingent in-between, rather than for a chronological completeness, which might provide a seemingly more comprehensive and intelligible meaning, but lacks the inexplicable, where the text loses its solid ground and attains a hidden dimension. It is a collection of texts that are fragments of writing, written from fragments of listening to the world and to works as a cosmos of interactuality, where things are possible in their mobile interbeing, made visible and graspable by sound. And so I invite you also to sort of listen to this performance of fragments, not to feel you have to necessarily feel, oh, I have to know the whole, I have to grasp it all, but to go with the rhythm as if it was a nighttime sea, and to just sort of hear and rehear and listen. This work by Marla Hladi and Eric Chenot performs an unstable contact. It records a swinging, turning microphones, fleeting moments of sounds and music, to propel them forward, not into a solid stereophonic image, but as flying snippets and movements of sound that have the force to hit our ears, but are not stable enough to demand their own space and solid name. Their contact is passing, uncontrolled, playful, purposeless, but not frivolous. Instead, through the certainty of technological devices, mounted microphones, mixing desks, and the know-how of Max MSP, it plays the insecurity of sound and its recording as a track on a record grasped by a needle that is in a most precarious and hovering relationship with what it plays. This is a conceptual work rather than a composition, a sculptural intervention into sound art, not as a physical build that spatializes its presentation, but as a mechanism, physical and mental, that enables its production, but ultimately it remains invisible, a thought and its possibility rather than an object. And as product for our perception, the sculptural device, the work's dispositif, is not the mic stand, the wooden plates and turning mechanism that facilitate its production, and neither is it the record player that continues it by propelling the sounds that touched its microphones in their passing in a centrifugal motion to pass your ears with the same speed into our perception. Instead, it is the flesh of sound and the flesh of our ears, our sensible in-between, that does not designate us as this or that, but makes us contingent bodies of perception. This flesh of contingent perception is Maurice Merleau-Ponty's sensible sentient, that does not see and hear a positive, transcendental object separate from itself, but perceives things through its simultaneity with them, in the negative space of their meeting. The invisible, the gap, the nothing of their vis-a-vis, where both are through being toucher and being touched. Contingent, the possibility of their meeting and passing shapes, rather than according to a priori name and description. The fleshly body sees things through being seen and touches itself through others and other things. Its perception is the intertwining of the self with the world. The self is not a transparent identity, but a contingent subjectivity, constituted in this entangled practice of perception. The flesh is the body as sensible sentient, as bodily indice in the world, where we do not perceive exteriority, but respond to the world through the position of our body within it, and form our reality from in between, not between things, but between ourselves and things. And these things are, according to Merleau-Ponty, encrusted into its flesh. They are part of its full definition. The world is made of the same stuff as the body. End of quote. And to add this, and to add to this, and to take it away from the body at the same time, I would suggest also that the body is made of the same stuff as the world. This practice is therefore not anthropocentric. This fleshly perception does not have to control the thing, the non-human, through the privilege of the human touch as grasping motion, but produces perception as flesh on flesh, not knowing either before, but getting to know through the unstable contact of touching and being touched invisibly. And to think and sense this invisible in-between, rather than highlighting the this or the that, but this in-between. I'd like us to perform this text score. So, Khaled, we can start this off. So if you have to come here, I'm afraid. And if you then all want to, all those who would like to, obviously you don't have to do this. stand back to the person next to you. If it's an odd number, you can go in pairs of 3 as well. So go into pairs, stand back to back, as close or as far as you like. Listen to each other for 2 minutes, and then make the sound of the other for 2 minutes. Thank you. You are so nice, and when I hold on to you, I feel the best feeling ever. Steve Roggenbach. Toshia Tsunoda's track, Unstable Contact, which you just heard from the album Scenery of Decoclomania from 2004, is a sonic thought that makes us think what a contact is, its experience and consequent, and what it is connecting, what is touching, and what is being touched. Sound is always an unstable contact. It is an insecure and unsecured connection that generates the world from the in-between or the negative space, where things are not, but where their sound meets that of other things and generates their interbeing, their being together and with each other. Listening to this unsecured connection, hearing the in-between, we can reassess the reality of the positive space, where things appear to be in their separate actuality, certain and stable, and query its truth and reality from the possibility of an unreliable sound. This sonic contact is entirely ephemeral and yet very physical. It is the place from which we experience the world and ourselves in the world and can contemplate and enact our connections, misses, and happenstance. Here we are in the encounter, performing collectively and contingently the negative form of our in-between. The non-form that does not delimit what each of us is, but that is the possibility of our being beyond our named description, as a being of each other and with each other, creating reality together on a wavering thread of sound. This co-constituted reality is invisible, experienced in the ephemeral volume of a shared sound. Listening and sound making brings our bodies into this volume and makes them add to it, be with it. To not be this or that, me or you, but to be what we are together in the indivisible expanse of a sonic in-between with everything else that sounds, and that sounds this space as a volume. And I'd like us to all make a sound, any sound. It doesn't have to be a nice sound, just be clapping, coughing, so we can break out of the visible and rupture what we think we see to create a volume together. So anybody who wants to, let's make a few sounds. And automatically we have a completely different space. A space that is the volume, an indivisible space that we are all in and that we all share, and where the space is not about sitting here or sitting there, but about how we sit together in this space. Making sounds together, we generate and cohabit the in-between and gain access to the indivisible sphere of a connected world. The invisible touching of our sounds makes our interbeing thinkable, without denying what we are individually, but by revealing how this individual identity is created in the in-between, the non-form that defines how things are formed. In this sense, our sounding together makes us think what a contact is, its experience and consequence, and what it is connecting, what is touching and what is being touched. It makes us rethink the stability of contacts, their purpose and direction, and allows us to contemplate whether misses and happenstance might not provide a useful way to think of how things are and how else they might be. The volume we create together through the unstable contact of our voices and sounds is not a measure of decibels, but the expanse of sound, the invisible and indivisible spread of its vibration and density. And it has honey's liquid form and its reciprocal grasp. Honeyed sense. It is a honeyed sense, according to Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who suggests that honey comes apart as soon as it has been given a particular shape. And what is more, it reverses the roles by grasping the hands of whoever would take hold of it. And I'd like to suggest that that's just like our sound. Sound grasps like honey's liquid form. And as such, a honeyed space, the voluminous time of sound, cannot be known from a distance, but it needs to be inhabited. It is a viscous space whose boundaries are fluid rather than fixed, ephemeral rather than solid, but nevertheless real as an inhabitable sphere. Thus it is a sonic cosmos without walls, windows, floors and ceilings, formlessly formed by our form of being with other things. As such, it promotes the reading and experience of place not as planned and built architectural site, but an indivisible sphere. And it does not understand disciplines as framed fields of single-voiced expertise. It also does not provide a bordered and solid political imaginary. Instead, the terms of its political governance, understood as the organization of how we live together, is agitational, interventionist, multisensory and capacious, potentially inexhaustible and infinite, created from unstable contact between things without a positive, defined shape. Such a capacious sonic cosmos can both be most vividly experienced and conceptualized when listening to a public swimming pool on a busy afternoon, sitting in a bathing suit with the waves in a place of uncertain lines, full of splashing, shrieking, and laughing, the sound of flesh and water buoyantly stretched in the reverberant echo of an aquatic world. Here the sonic space heard does not coincide with the architectural outline, but performs its own sphere, whose boundaries are not defined against walls, but through their invisible dimensionality, and whose objects do not exist next to each other, but through each other, indivisibly grasped in the density of humid air that includes me as a listening bather with others and other things in a voluminous spatiality. Beating eggs sounds the motion of hitting a liquid into a firm shape. It sounds not the beating nor the egg, but the chiming of metal hitting metal through nothingness until the nothingness offers some resistance. The sonic resistance of viscous foam cushioning itself. Vigorously sounding what it beats, it slowly changes sound, producing a sonic tautology, the materiality of ephemeral fluff. The materiality of the egg's ephemeral fluff is sound's sonority. And it is this sonority that gives access to the viscid connection between things that might touch briefly from unstable and unsecured connections, or miss entirely, but always produce an indivisible volume that sounds what they are contingently and with each other rather than as separate things, as signs identified through the organization of the lexicon and the grammar of language, where we are separate. Thus in sound, space, as a social and political space, as an intimate space, as a private or a public space, emerges not as an institution, but as a contingent happening, producing a time-space place of interbeing and interacting things. Its autonomy, its authority cannot be assumed from its build and status, but has to be performed and reperformed contingently, admitting also the less heard and the incidental into its song. My cough, the screeching door, a cleaner's hoover, brooms, shovels, a security guard's walkie-talkie, the wind and the rain. I experienced this shared space in Eino Dwyer's Music for Church Cleaners, an album that was recorded in St. Mark's Church in Islington in London in 2011 and released in 2015. Her volume of unstable contacts cannot be known from a distance, but needs to be inhabited as it finds its contingent reality in the interactions and encounters that realize its sphere. It is a sonic cosmos, formlessly formed from our being as into being with every other thing. This sonic cosmos is the sphere of Audre Lorde's, and I quote, interdependence of mutual non-dominant differences, end of quote, within which lies, and she suggests further, that security which enables us to descend into the chaos of knowledge and return with true visions of our future, along with the concomitant power to effect those changes which can bring that future into being, end of quote. Lorde identifies mutual difference without dominance as the true force for the emancipation of other voices that sound, and I quote her again, within that interdependency of different strengths, end of quote. And they sound together the hope and preparedness for a community of difference from which the dominant, the positive, the presumed stable and normative can be unstaged. This other voice is that of transformation, of the invisible self transformed in between and with others without becoming the same. Aware of difference in an interdependent world as volume of coexisting things. This voluminous sphere of the world's sonorous expanse is then not a homogeneous mass, but a viscosity created in internal friction. It is the formlessness of difference before it finds organization and a lexical reference that places it at the margins and in terms of what it is not. It is difference in the encounter, not suppressed or ignored, but practiced. Thus, it is, according to Lorde, difference between the passive be and the active being, end of quote. And this active being is an interbeing that forms in interactions at the in-between, through contingent encounters that take on honey's liquid form and demand the responsibility of participation, to be heard in formlessness, creating the chaos of new knowledge and preparing the vista for an unknown future without feeling threatened by its unfamiliarity. And to listen out for what this unfamiliarity might be, I'd like to do one more score together. So again, if you could get together with another person or even two other people. So sitting down or standing up, whatever you prefer. Look at the face of the person next to you. Start to imagine the inaudible sounds between you. When you hear that sound, make it. Thanks for trying. The face, entreating yet ultimately indifferent, stares back from the pages of magazines, from the billboards, flyers, and screens. Within these faces is the eyes that have it, the eyes that judge, the eyes that implore, The eyes that constitute, irrespective of their place within the pictorial border, the gravitational nexus of the image, into which attention is initially drawn. It is interesting to consider that in the pseudo-public media spaces, it is these same eyes which frequently bear the brunt of the delinquent viewer's interventions, providing a target for chewed gum, scrawled biro, and smearing of fingers. Angus Carlyle, The Reluctant Sitter. However, this creative chaos, the instability and formlessness of its knowledge, which is the site of pleasure, love, happenstance, and misses, which can allow us to produce a sensible sentience, a contingent self, an interdependent difference, that turns us into active, capacious, and entangled beings, that defy walls and the violence of formation, and create the potential for plurality and transformation opened at the encounter in the invisible and voluminous space of collaboration, can also be abused. Its mobility arrested, its formlessness deformed, its instability defamed, its passing nature ignored, its transformativity mythologized, its audibility overheard, its openness defaced. Because sound, just like Hélène Cixous's Féminine, does not chase its own revenue. She does not recover her expenses. Sound, like her, is not the being of the end, the goal, but she is how far being reaches. And this reach is inexhaustible, moving and boundless. It does not demarcate itself within the masculine logic of representation and thus remains misheard. Therefore, within the celebration of sound's emancipatory power and its creative formlessness comes anger about what remains inaudible, and anger also at having her economy of love misused. Thank you, and thanks for taking the time.
Like to stay, and also we have first we came to us. If you'd like to buy some amazing book,
yeah,
basically inspire this performance, and you will get it at a discounted price. So I'm going to distribute.
Or you can just pick them up if you want to. So I couldn't bring any books to sell here because it's too heavy and difficult. So, but what the publisher gave me are these things, and on there is a code. So if you want it anyway, with that code you get it a lot cheaper. You don't have to buy it through the form. You can buy it online, but you basically just need the code. And the flyer also tells you what it is all about in more detail.
All right, and then we can right here.
Do you want to? Yes. And I'm very happy to answer questions too, if there are any in the meantime.
Guys, this is going to happen very informally, so please feel free to participate.
Oh, I got some there. Thank you. I mean, I can, if there are any questions as we're waiting. Oh, voila, here he is. Shall I take this off? Because otherwise only I am amplified, which is a bit awkward. Shall I take this off?
All right. by asking about, and maybe this is like I'm off to a selfish start because it sort of reflects my own sort of questioning and interest, especially after this whole month of, you know, different kinds of inquiries surrounding sound listening, etc. I'd like you to talk maybe a bit about how through sound we can rethink our understanding of materiality and what are the implications of that, especially with reference to political possibilities, but also what are the limitations.
Are you referring particularly to the chapter on new material, sonic new materials? So, I mean, I don't know, depending on what you do. There is this, in the current discourse, there is this thing called new materialism, this sort of idea that we should re-engage in the material world in a new way, addressing the problems humans bring to the world, the anthropocentrism, that we're always, that we're using the material, that the material is always for us rather than it for itself, or that nature is for itself. And I feel sound can make a very interesting contribution to how we think our relationship to things in the world, things we've made, but also things that are in nature, that are human, animal, but also non-animal. Because of exactly what we try to practice, I suppose, in this talk, which is this in-between, this idea that when I have a visual consciousness, and this is a cultural visual consciousness, it's not, you could look in many different ways on the world, you can see many different things, but culturally we sort of look at things for their purpose. This is a chair because it allows me to sit on it. It has 4 legs, it fulfills all the prerequisites of what a chair is, and reaching out to it if you have to. Whereas I think in sound we can reconsider these certainties about what things are by being back to back, by listening to the in-between rather than this or that, by rethinking not only what is this chair for me, but what is between us. And therefore, as a kind of strategy for a sonic new materialism, it's about how this in-between, this volume in between is constituted for us to rethink how we deal with other humans, how we deal with the non-human, how we deal with how we interact. And so new materialism often, particular strands of new materialism, often take the human being just out and replace it through mathematics, or by suggesting, well, we just have to go and then the world is there. But I actually think that we have done quite considerable damage to this world. I don't think this is the moment for us to go. I think this is the moment for us to take responsibility and fix certain things as well. And so that's why I was interested to try to, is there a possibility to rethink how we relate? And I'm not saying I'm giving necessarily answers, because it's so difficult. We are within our norms. We're always already constituted culturally, ideologically, politically. What is sound? We could spend a whole day just listening, how we could rethink how things relate.
And then also with reference to like political possibility. So when we talk about the sort of new forms of cohabitation that sounds makes possible, and the sort of alternative, like so-called alternative spaces that emerge around experiences of shared listening, there's always an emphasis on the transitory, on the ephemeral. For someone who's interested in continuity and in the cumulative, is there any way to think about the political possibility of sound in relation to that and escape, or maybe like go beyond the ephemeral and the transitory?
Yes and no, because I think, yes, it is transitory and it's sort of a discontinuity in many ways, but it is a continuous discontinuity because it's always, at this moment when we speak together, this is what it is here, I suppose, there's another volume, other people saying things, and there are different relationships being built up, and that is always somewhere. It continues, there is a continuity, but it's not one that rests on, oh, I know who you are. I know who you are already. I need to constantly be in doubt, and to slip into my prejudices or my ideas of what something or someone is. So it's very demanding, I think, and I don't think we could probably not do it all day long. It's very exhausting, but I think it's worthwhile as like a workout in a gym, you know, a workout for how else we can engage with everything that's around us. And I'm more doubtful, I'm not sure. We need to know more.
Building on the narrative differently, I found the part of cosmopolitanism extremely fascinating. And the idea was that you draw the difference between, the visual cosmopolitanism and oral cosmopolitanism. And the idea is that when it comes to the visual, it's about transcending boundaries. It's about, when we map out geography is what's visual, we draw the borders. And then when it comes to oral architecture, to kind of sound, you remove those boundaries. And the idea is that it's a different form of cosmopolitanism, which is we co-inhabit space, as you say, but also there is this idea that the ideal of cosmopolitanism already exists when it comes to the outside. And while I find that very interesting as a differentiation, definitely, I also wonder then what happens when we talk about the power of the source of sound, and where does technology, what role does technology play in this? Does it become a shopping mart in some sense? In this instinctive idea of power. So I'm curious to know your thoughts about that. I think how do we build on that?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think it's what the last slide tried to get to. Because of this openness and formlessness, because of this shared world that we have, it is highly useful. It is very possible that the loudest voice will just take over. Will just take over this shared space. So it's not, we're not saying, oh, sound is just marvelous, it will solve all our problems, it's benign and it's wonderful. I think no, but it brings out a different way that think about the borders that are drawn on a map, and so this is the border, and actually sound doesn't obey these borders, and it can make us think of the almost ridiculousness of them, and of the ideologies of the project of drawing borders. It doesn't necessarily, again, provide the solution of how to undraw borders, but it at least shifts it from just simply accept that look at the map, simply accept this is one country, this is another country. While you look at an architectural plan, this is one house, this is another house. And this is a simple acceptance we just all have, also when we talk about our own environment. And to just actually shift it just slightly through sound, as cosmopolitanism think, actually it's ridiculous. And even just that, the unperforming in an affirmative way of what these boundaries that we have are. And obviously, I live in England at the moment, and Brexit is all about making a really strong boundary in a very, very silly way, in my opinion. And to think about the ridiculousness, and I think that is where criticality can come from. But I absolutely agree, there is I'm euphoric about the possibility of performance and how the world can be redesigned and rethought. I already know a lot of it has been taken over again by the multiples. If you think of sound design in public spaces, I don't know how it is in Jordan, but in England certainly, you have sound designers who are mainly white men who design what the tube sounds like, who does the announcements, who tells you what to do, how is it told to you by sound and voice. There's the soft control of the female voice that tells you when to get off and when to get on. And then there is the strong control, the coercive control is a male voice that tells you off in protest situations and the police control it. And it's very interesting that most sound designers again fall into a normative category and think of a category development as diversity. So no, I agree that yes,
I do have further questions, but I think we'll move on and then.
I don't know, although that we are thinking about the in-between and to transcend the material, like how the movement of sound art or this lens of seeing what's in between and the inaudible, this is how this would compare with spiritualism of the ancient, and how the new movement wouldn't repeat the same pattern of controlling the in-between. Will it be controlled one way, and how this politically would happen? Is it the same pattern? Because, you know, but really that kind of passion that, for example, in the Middle East and in the whole world, it's exponential to see sound artists. No, it's very common that you find many people, many musicians, they call themselves sound artists. How's it going to flip?
Yes. I mean, I think there are two different things. I mean, with sound art and with artists, there's always this idea I do something that is not object-based for its sort of emancipatory force and its radical force and its criticality, but then there is a system of art and trade and a gallery system where increasingly then the demand is made, yeah, but we want to see something, and we want something we can sell, and something we can collect. And so there is this persuasion that you, oh, remember, I have to do that. I have to firm up my work so it's collectible, at least through a catalogue, through exhibition shops. I have to somehow work with the legitimizing vocabulary that's given. I have to fit in, and of course you have to. Every artist has to a certain degree in order to make money and to make a living. There's a compromise, I think, taking place. Which is sort of difficult when you talk about this area. I think performance is one way to deal with that. It sort of has its own economy of trying not to produce something, but to produce a sort of an event, something that happens and then goes. But then again, I fully understand that when you write a book, it is an object that legitimizes the performance. So you're always in this really weird relationship between legitimacy and non-legitimacy. So that's on the aesthetic, I think, on the aesthetic, the radicalness of the aesthetic, and always being pulled in again. But I don't think that means we shouldn't do it. You know, I don't think just because there is a slight inevitability, the engine and the energy doesn't still drive something forward. I still think that has still validity entirely. And I think the same happens on the political side. I couldn't talk about ancient spirituality, but I think again, as soon as you have something that is open and formless, there will be somebody who will colonialize it. There will be somebody who will grasp it, because it's this idea of a land without people, but you don't see those that are moving around them. So you grab it. And so I think that also will happen again. I think that's my last slide about this almost, despair about how you can't be formless without being taken over. But again, I still think as a political entity position, you just have to unform, unperform, formed, because there is a violence in formation. Eir who writes about vertical geography says this very well. How things are formed, there is a violence in that. People and geographies. He writes about Palestine and the building of walls and the violence of that formation through geography of architecture. And I think that is a good reality and a good metaphor. And still our task can be to unform affirmatively again and again and again, to try to not just think that that's just how it is. Because that is the very depressed place of it can't be any other way.
Yes, I think what Eir was like, I was thinking that I was going to ask is like controlling of the technology itself. Because I was sharing with them in the workshop of the big funk sounds, and I shared about this sonic cortex. And that's a technology that uses sounds and use sounds to harm physically for hearing, to repel the demonstrations and like the new silence, I don't know, very high pitch and very low pitch to reject physically from the demonstration. So okay, like now we're talking about political systems that they're using the technology of sound and also having the approval or something like that. So then what's happening here? Are we considering the sound as a volume where we can understand the in-between? Or is it going to be again another pattern of dominance and political power?
So just to add on that, what's the relationship between sound maybe as counterculture to the visual, and then sound as a space to occupy post-liberation, for instance? And I think it's that dichotomy, even I think it's revealed throughout some of the texts. It's an interesting.
I think, of course, even the sonic weapon is an in-between. It's just not a very nice in-between.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't want to say that the in-between has to necessarily be benign. I mean, you can have somebody who shouts at you and who abuses you verbally and creates an in-between that is horrific. But that in-between still tells you a lot about this moment, and so it can still be listened to in that same way to find the right response, to find strength in a response that might not be the usual response, that gives a different possibility of how to respond. And yes, and some weapons are also they belong into this thing that public design. Public design is normally visual, but increasingly this design is supported and coerced and manipulated through sonic designs of what's in how the tube addresses you, music and shots, but also yes, into a protest. These sound cannons they now have on the police vans when they go into a demonstration, which is horrific. And I mean, people go there. The police officers, the army, they also go there because, of course, it doesn't really help that much. So I think it's something we need to talk about and to really think about. Sometimes I think maybe the metaphor is like, it's just how we all, there is problems, and the military officers will eventually still be police in the military because they will go there too. And I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying it can make us think about it. It can make us see the space between this band that makes the sound such as us in a different way. And find maybe energy to respond differently.
Maybe we take questions from the audience.
Listening a little bit, it's reform.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for sharing this experience here in Jordan. Thanks for sharing those beautiful two pieces of music. Really good. I mean, they're kind of innovative music, they're kind of mind pollution, really. When you said about the, like when you talked actually about the horrific effect of those, like sometimes people, let's say mad or angry people, show what they have inside, or show the hatred that they have inside by their voice that they got, or they make. So it really takes a bad effect, because sometimes you can tell the person about from his voice, actually, because sometimes they train you how to speak. Really, you should have like a really nice tone, but like when you hear people talking, you hear that they are kind of, let's say, chaotic. So, interesting. Got my.
But I don't know whether I would say they are chaotic, whether I would give them an identity, but maybe at that moment they sound that, and that is the space that's between them. But I would sort of maybe refrain from it saying that's what they are, because then you're sort of in a visual cultural, oh they are this, they're that. But I think it's how we then respond and how we then are in this volume together, and how you share that space, and whether you feel overwhelmed because somebody's chaotic, somebody's step back, or whether kind of determines this relationship and how you can agitate within it, rather than just thinking, oh, he's just an idiot and I walk away. But that kind of you share this thing together and rethink maybe where you both come from at that moment. I hope that can be useful.
Yes, experience.
Of course. Anyone else?
I do have the gentleman, but it's not maybe a gentleman question to food for thought. And this is maybe more linked to your practice rather than, it's very interesting when we talk about the idea of possibility of sound in architecture, that art ceases to become, for me, a reactionary form of rather it's art as a form of novelty in some sense. And it's to imagine, I think, it becomes, the act of interrogation becomes generative, as you said. And so my question is, what are, in your opinion, the capacities or opportunities which arise when you're dealing with such an uncertain medium in something which, for a very long time was as precise as the field of knowledge?
I think it's interesting because our knowledge pretends it's very precise, it's very rational, and we know things, and we can give them a number, and we can visualize them, and then we're sure that's what it's like. But I actually think that's not entirely true. It's quite reductive. It's reductive for purposes of communication. I sort of in my other life, I also run a research project called Listening Cross Discipline, where I work as a biomedical acoustic engineer on figuring out quite pragmatically what listening can do to the knowledge discourse in science and in other areas such as architecture, urban planning, speech synthesis for people who lose their voice, because they have motor neuron disease and so on. And it's very interesting. I've worked with Anna, a biomedical engineer, for about 3-4 years now, and she listens to lungs, and she listens to the speech for Alzheimer's, the speech and lungs for pulmonary diseases. And I say listen because she didn't listen. She didn't listen at all. Like most people in her area, she looked at the spectrogram, or she listened to a recorded snippet of the lung. She didn't actually touch a human being with lungs. But over the process of working, she felt like, no, I can see here, I can see these things in the spectrogram, that's to the end. But over the course of working together, she started to listen to the lungs and so on. And she said, it's so interesting because here's the spectrogram, the visualization delivers a knowledge that is useful and that is trusted in our society. The visual is trusted. This is the real lung sound. But she says there is something that happens when she listens. As she touches the body, she realizes these lungs are in the body. So there is a whole knowledge thing going on there. How pale is this person? How well do they know? And then she looks at the spectrogram differently now. There is like an added, so I'm not saying I'm going to take the visual away, not at all, I'm not at all against the visual, but I think if we could trust the sonic to also deliver knowledge that is legitimate, that might be more wider in its reference points, more open, more formless, but if we could just trust that to deliver something, additionally, and in collaboration with, I think it could enhance how we think about the world. I mean, I speak very much as a European. I think there are other parts of the world where this wider, more formless knowledge has more weight. I'm talking from my own multicultural determinants.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for